They whispered his name like a curse. Not in taverns, not in markets, not even in the privacy of their homes. Wolves lowered their voices when they spoke it, their gazes flicking to corners as though the shadows themselves might be listening. Kalen, the Alpha King, the ruler who seized the crown with bloodied claws and teeth, who had bathed in the screams of his rivals until the throne dripped with their silence. The monarch whose reign was measured not by the loyalty he commanded, but by the fear he inspired. He was the Alpha who was destined to remain alone, not by choice, not by decree, but by curse. For every she-wolf who had ever dared to claim him as mate ended the same way, broken, breathless, and cold in the ground. Some swore the gods themselves had condemned him. Others said his heart was so black that no bond could survive its darkness. But whatever the truth, no she-wolf dared tempt fate. Not anymore. And so the Alpha King ruled alone. The council chamber that night was a cage of tension. The table stretched long and narrow, carved from ancient oak, its edges scarred by centuries of claws and daggers. Firelight from the iron braziers licked across the stone walls, but no warmth touched the air. The wolves seated there, the kingdom's eldest and most trusted voices, looked everywhere but at the man at the head of the table. Kalen sat like carved obsidian, broad-shouldered, immovable, dangerous in his stillness. The leather of his armor caught faint gleams from the fire, but it was his eyes that silenced the room. Eyes black as midnight, as if they had devoured the gold and amber of his bloodline and left only void behind. "Your Majesty," one elder stammered, "we must discuss the border raids. The East grows restless, and—" The scrape of Kalen's chair drowned the man's words, slow, deliberate. He rose to his full height. He did not need to growl. He did not need to bare his teeth. His presence alone was enough to crush the breath from every throat. "I grow tired of your squabbling," Kalen said, his voice low, cold, each syllable a blade sliding against stone. "We are wolves. We do not beg. We do not chatter like frightened humans. My word is law. If the East rises, I will put them down myself." The chamber stilled. One by one, the elders lowered their gazes. Not a whisper followed. Not a cough. Even the flames seemed to shrink under the weight of his dominance. Finally, Kalen's hand flicked in dismissal. The council erupted into sudden motion, chairs scraping, robes rustling, voices stumbling over hurried bows and apologies. They shuffled out, a pack of once proud leaders reduced to prey in the presence of their king. Only when the last of them had left did Kalen allow his gaze to linger on the empty seats, his mouth curving in something too sharp to be called a smile. The great hall outside was a different world. Torches burned bright against high stone arches, casting long shadows across banners of crimson and silver. Servants hurried across polished floors, balancing trays of roasted meat and overflowing goblets. Guards lined the walls, their spears catching the firelight. And woven through the throng, small and unsteady, was a girl who did not belong. Lyra. She had no right to be here. No Omega ever did. Born at the lowest rung of the hierarchy, Omegas were expected to obey, to serve, to disappear into the background of a kingdom built on dominance. They were hearth-tenders, cleaners, seamstresses. Their voices carried no weight, their bloodlines no pride. Lyra knew her place. She knew it well enough to resent it, but not enough to defy it. So when the kitchen steward had collapsed with fever that afternoon, and the palace had been thrown into disarray, she had not volunteered when the assistant barked for help. She had tried to fade back into the shadows, to let someone else carry the burden. But shadows never held long enough for her. "You," the assistant had snapped, eyes narrowing on her. Me, Lyra had stammered. "Yes, you. Take this tray. The banquet can't wait. If you spill a drop, don't bother showing your face in the kitchen tomorrow." Before she could argue, before she could even protest, a goblet of wine was shoved into her hands, a tray balanced precariously against her trembling fingers. A too tight dress was thrown over her head, its seams biting at her ribs, her hair pinned up in a rushed twist. And then she was shoved into the storm. Now she walked the polished marble, her heart hammering louder than the drums in the courtyard beyond. Her eyes never lifted from the floor. If she looked up, she might meet the gaze of a noble. Or worse. She had heard the stories of what happened to servants who drew unwanted attention. An Omega girl had once tripped near the throne. Her ankle snapped before anyone could even lift her. Another had spilled wine on a noble's cloak. She was never seen again. So Lyra clutched the tray tight, praying her hands would not shake. But prayers were fragile things, and fate had always been cruel. The banquet swelled with noise, laughter that rang too sharp, toasts that fell heavy with false cheer. Wolves in silken robes and jeweled collars clinked goblets, their voices weaving together like a net that tangled Lyra's every step. Above them, tapestries hung depicting kings long past, wolves who had ruled with honor, who had built instead of destroyed. But Kaelin's tapestry was missing. Perhaps no one dared stitch a likeness of the king who ruled by fear. Lyra's stomach twisted. She moved carefully between the nobles, the tray balanced in her hands, her breath shallow. She thought, foolishly, that if she was careful enough, silent enough, she would go unnoticed. Then the room froze. A chill swept through the air like a storm cloud blotting out the sun. Conversation cut mid-sentence. Laughter choked silent. Kaelin entered. The Alpha King moved with the inevitability of a predator. He wore no crown, he needed none. Power clung to him like a second skin, heavy and suffocating. His cloak, black as a raven's wing, trailed behind him, its edges trimmed with the fur of wolves he had slain himself. His boots echoed against the stone, each step a heartbeat that belonged not to him, but to everyone who watched. Lyra's blood iced. She had seen him before from a distance, glimpses at the edges of processions or ceremonies. But here now, with nothing between them but the fragile air, her tray shook. A goblet teetered. She caught it with fumbling fingers, her breath catching in panic. But the damage was already done. Kaelin's eyes lifted. They found her. The hall blurred into shadow. Nobles became faceless. Servants vanished. Guards faded to nothing. There was only him and her. Lyra could not breathe, could not blink. Those eyes, black, endless, merciless, locked onto her as though they had been waiting all along. She wanted to look away, to bow her head, to disappear into the floor, but she couldn't. Her body betrayed her, frozen in his stare, her pulse a frantic drumbeat he surely could hear. A whisper rippled through the hall. Who was she? Why her? An Omega? Madness. Kaelin's gaze did not falter. The silence thickened until it pressed against Lyra's chest, stealing what little air she had left. Her legs shook, but still she stood, trapped. And then it happened. Kaelin's mouth curved. A smile. Slow. Deliberate. Dangerous.
The Alpha King, who had never spared warmth for any soul, the cursed monarch no she-wolf dared to love, smiled at an Omega servant carrying a tray of wine. Gasps stirred the crowd. Whispers hissed like serpents. Lyra's fingers dug into the tray, her knuckles white. Her lungs refused air. Because everyone knew what it meant when the king smiled at a woman. It was not a blessing. It was not an honor. It was a death sentence dressed in silk. I didn't choose him. He chose me. The whispers didn't stop after that night. Lyra could feel them, trailing her like ghosts through the palace halls. Servants who once ignored her now stared when she passed, their mouths twisting with pity or jealousy. Nobles sneered from behind jeweled goblets. Some dared not speak her name, as if saying it might tether them to her fate. The Omega who had caught the king's eye. The girl who should already be dead. Lyra tried to disappear. She hid in kitchens, bent her head, busied her hands until her skin ached and her back screamed. But invisibility was no longer hers. Wherever she went, there were eyes. Waiting. Watching. Because if the stories were true, she had already signed her death sentence. No she-wolf survived the Alpha King's claim. Days bled into nights, and still Kaelin summoned no word. He did not call for her. He did not demand her presence. For a fragile moment, Lyra almost believed it had been nothing. A cruel twist of his lips mistaken for a smile. A fluke. A nightmare. But the reprieve shattered at the next gathering. The hall was thick with heat and perfume, nobles packed shoulder to shoulder, their voices raised in hollow cheer. Lyra had been shoved into service again, a tray of roasted meats balanced against her hip. She tried to keep her eyes fixed on the floor, but her body buzzed with dread. Then the silence fell. Kaelin entered. The shift in the air was suffocating. Conversations broke, laughter died. Wolves bowed their heads, shoulders stiff with reverence and fear. Lyra froze, her tray heavy in her hands, her heart a wild, traitorous drum. This time, he didn't just glance at her. He moved toward her. The crowd parted like water fleeing fire, nobles stepping back, servants shrinking against the walls. Kaelin's steps were unhurried, deliberate, each one striking against the stone like the toll of a bell. He stopped before her. Lyra's breath caught. The king's shadow fell over her, swallowing the torchlight. His scent, smoke and iron, sharp as blood, wrapped around her throat, choking the air from her lungs. "Your name," Kaelin said, his voice low, his gaze unrelenting. It wasn't a question. It was a command. Her lips trembled. "El." "Lyra." A murmur rippled through the hall. An Omega dared to stand before him, dared to speak. Kaelin's mouth curved, not in cruelty, not in amusement, but in something sharper, more dangerous. He reached for her. Before she could move, before she could even think, his hand was at her throat. Not tight. Not crushing. Just enough for the heat of his palm to burn against her skin, for her pulse to thunder against his fingers. Her tray slipped from her grasp, the crash of metal and food scattering across the floor drowned in the ringing silence of the hall. And then he bent. Slow. Unhurried. His mouth brushed against her neck. Lyra's body jolted as pain seared through her skin, sharp and electric, racing like fire down her veins. She gasped, clutching at his wrist, her nails digging into leather, but his grip only tightened. The crowd erupted in gasps, shouts, the sound of chairs scraping back in shock. He was marking her. The Alpha King was claiming her in front of them all. It was no gentle ritual, no tender bonding whispered between fated lovers. This was public. Brutal. A declaration carved into flesh and soul alike. Lyra cried out, her knees buckling, heat flooding her body until she thought her blood would boil away. The mark seared deeper, not just into her skin but into something unseen, something primal, ancient. Her heartbeat was no longer her own. It beat in rhythm with his. When Kaelin lifted his head, his teeth stained crimson, silence smothered the hall. He looked down at her, his eyes black and endless. Mine. The word rumbled through the chamber, a vow and a verdict in one. Lyra staggered back, her hand pressed to the burning wound at her neck. Her breath came in ragged gasps, her body trembling, not from weakness but from the bond's cruel intoxication. Because even as terror strangled her, another feeling stirred, sharp, dangerous, undeniable. Desire. The pull of the mark sang through her blood, dragging her closer to him when every instinct screamed to run. It was a chain, invisible yet unbreakable, binding her to the monster who had destroyed every she-wolf before her. No, she rasped, shaking her head. I won't. I won't accept this. Kaelin's smile was slow, cruel. You don't have a choice. The hall broke into chaos. Nobles shouted, voices raised in outrage. Elders whispered of curses and doom. Servants scattered like frightened birds. But none dared step forward, none dared challenge what they had witnessed. The Alpha King had claimed his mate. And his mate was an Omega. That night, Lyra sat in the chamber she had been forced into, her hands trembling as she pressed a cloth against her neck. The mark still burned, a dull throb that pulsed with his heartbeat, as if her body itself had betrayed her. She stared at the shadows creeping across the walls, her mind a storm. She hadn't chosen him. She hadn't asked for this. And yet, every breath she drew, every flutter of her pulse, was no longer hers alone. The bond tugged at her, cruel and unyielding, drawing her toward him. She fought it, clenching her fists until her nails bit deep. I won't accept this. I won't become another name whispered in fear. I'll survive this. I'll survive him. Her resolve burned hot. But the bond burned hotter. The door opened. She shot to her feet, her heart slamming into her ribs. Kalen stepped inside. The air thickened, his presence filling the chamber, wrapping around her like chains. He closed the door with a quiet finality, the click echoing louder than a slammed gate. Lyra forced herself to stand tall, though her knees trembled. I didn't choose you. I never will. Kalen's gaze swept over her, dark and unreadable. Then, slowly, he crossed the room, each step unhurried, predatory. He stopped inches from her, his shadow swallowing hers. His hand lifted, brushing against the fresh mark on her neck. She flinched, but his touch was almost gentle, almost. You will fight me, he murmured, his voice a blade dipped in velvet. Good. I prefer prey that claws before it falls. His mouth lowered, his breath hot against her ear. And then, with a whisper that sank into her bones, he spoke her name. Lyra. Her body shuddered. Her breath hitched. The bond surged, molten and merciless, and though her mind screamed in defiance, her body betrayed her. Heat coiled low in her belly, her pulse racing, her knees weakening. She bit her lip until blood touched her tongue, fighting the wave that threatened to drown her. But it was too late. The curse had begun. No she-wolf survived him. And yet, I was still breathing. The castle didn't sleep. That night, whispers traveled faster than fire across dry leaves. Servants carried the rumors through stone halls, warriors murmured in the barracks, and even the children in the kitchens repeated the tale with trembling lips. The cursed Alpha King had finally taken a mate. And the mate was me. I walked through corridors that suddenly felt like hunting grounds, every glance a dagger. Where once I had been invisible, just another lowly Omega servant slipping through shadows, now I was a spectacle. My name dripped from the mouths of wolves with disdain, with envy, with hate. She won't last the week. None of them ever do. The curse will claim her. Or he will. The rumors had power, and they pressed against me like 1,000 claws. My steps echoed too loud on the polished floors. My breath felt too shallow for my own lungs. And yet, here I was. Still alive. By morning, the whispers reached the council chamber. The same room where I had first seen Kalen's dominance choke the air, now brimmed with something else, fear. The elders gathered, their robes brushing against the carved oak table, their eyes glittering with quiet calculation. She cannot remain here, Elder Vena hissed, her silver braid coiled like a serpent around her shoulder. This girl is a threat to us all. Or a hope, countered Elder Arion, though his tone trembled. If the curse is broken. The room stilled. No one truly believed in hope. Not here. Not when Kalen's very presence was a reminder of death. Then the door creaked open. He entered. Kalen strode into the chamber, dark cloak sweeping the floor, his aura swallowing the oxygen itself. I followed behind, my pulse tripping over itself, the mark on my neck still burning from his claim. The elders bowed. Even the dissenting ones who hated him bent their spines. Because fear always bent first. Kalen's voice was low, deliberate. Speak your treason plainly. Elder Vena's mouth trembled before she found courage in venom. You bring her here, curse or not, and doom us all. She does not belong. His eyes slid to me, and for the first time, I felt something like defense. His words were blades, sharp enough to draw blood. She belongs to me. No growl. No roar. Just certainty. And the council fell silent. Days passed, and the tension in the castle coiled tighter. Wolves loyal to Kaelin treated me with forced respect, their eyes avoiding mine. Others, warriors, courtiers, even servants, let their hatred slip through their teeth. My food tasted wrong, too bitter, too salted. My clothes sometimes vanished from where I left them. Once, I woke to find a wolf's paw print smeared in blood across my chamber door. It was a warning. They didn't just expect me to die, they wanted me to. Kaelin didn't explain. He didn't soothe. He didn't even look at me the way a mate was supposed to. His touches were rare, his words even rarer, yet every time he entered a room, my body betrayed me, the mark throbbed, my skin burned, my senses heightened until I could hear his heartbeat across the hall. I hated it. I hated how the bond curled around my veins like fire and silk. I hated how he invaded my dreams, how his whisper lingered against my throat long after he had gone. But I hated more that part of me, wanted it. One storm-torn night, as thunder cracked the sky and the pack howled restlessly, I roamed the silent halls. Sleep evaded me, dread gnawed at my bones. My feet carried me further than I meant to go, to a place most Omegas never dared enter. Kaelin's private chambers. The door was ajar. That alone was wrong, he was meticulous, controlled, never careless. I slipped inside. The room was vast, lit only by the orange glow of a dying fire. Shadows draped the walls, heavy with silence. His scent was everywhere, cedar, smoke, danger. I shouldn't have lingered. I should have left. But something tugged me deeper. Past the massive bed draped in furs. Past shelves of old tomes written in tongues I couldn't read. Past armor gleaming like a warning. To a chest. It sat in the corner, half hidden beneath a tapestry. Old wood, iron lock, but unlocked tonight. My hands shook as I lifted the lid. The bloody evidence. Inside, cloth. Folded, neat. Dresses. Not mine. Silks, velvets, fine garments worn by women who once walked these halls as his mates. And beneath them, blood. Stains soaked into the fabric, old and dark but unmistakable. Dresses slashed through as if by claws. Jewelry bent and broken. A single lock of hair, still braided, tied with ribbon. My stomach churned. My vision blurred. It wasn't the curse. It wasn't fate. These women hadn't just died. They had been murdered. My breath caught in my throat. I reached deeper, fingers trembling over the fabric. And there, hidden beneath the weight of it all, was a dagger. Its silver edge still stained crimson. And carved into the blade, his sigil. The mark of the Alpha King. The air rushed from my lungs. My heart thundered so loud I feared the whole castle would hear. I stumbled back, chest heaving, staring at the chest that now looked more like a grave. The curse wasn't myth. It wasn't destiny. It was him. Or at least, everything pointed to him. I slammed the lid shut, pulse racing, sweat cold on my skin. And then... curiosity, a voice drawled from the shadows, deep and familiar. I froze. The fire flared, and there he stood. Kaelin. His eyes glowed with a dangerous light, fixed on me, on the chest, on the evidence my trembling hands still hovered over. The silence stretched. And he smiled. Not cruel. Not warm. Just unreadable. Tell me, little Omega, he whispered, stepping closer, the air vibrating with his power. What exactly have you found? If loving him meant dying, was I willing to risk it? The moon was high, its silver light spilling through the tall windows of the king's fortress. The palace always seemed colder at night, as though the walls themselves carried the whispers of the dead, those who had once loved him, and those who had tried to destroy him. And now I knew the truth. The evidence I had found was undeniable: bloodied scraps of cloth, personal trinkets, and markings that carried the scent of death. The women hadn't simply vanished into the curse of his bond, they had been murdered. But whether by his hand or someone else's, I wasn't sure. What I did know was this: standing too close to him meant death. And yet, I was still breathing. I was his chosen mate, the one wolf he hadn't killed. But as the shadows lengthened and the weight of the palace pressed in, I couldn't shake the question echoing in my chest: was I still alive because he wanted me, or because he was waiting for the perfect moment to break me? The Alpha King, Kirin, stood in the center of his war chamber when I entered. Torches cast his sharp features in gold and shadow, making him look carved from stone. His presence was suffocating, raw power radiating from every inch of him. His dark eyes found me immediately. No words were needed. He knew I'd been in his chambers, knew I'd found what was hidden there. "You shouldn't wander where you don't belong," he said finally, his voice low, like a growl held tightly on a chain. My pulse throbbed in my throat, but I lifted my chin. Maybe if you didn't have so much to hide, I wouldn't have to wander. A dangerous silence filled the room. Elders shifted uncomfortably, guards bowed their heads, as if bracing for violence. But instead of anger, his mouth curved. Not a smile, but something darker. "Defiance," he murmured, stepping closer. "It's the reason you're still alive. Every other she-wolf wanted to obey me. You want to fight me."
My body stiffened as he closed the distance. His scent, wood smoke, blood, and power, wrapped around me like chains. "I don't want to fight you," I whispered, though even I could hear the lie in my voice. "I want the truth." He leaned down, his lips close enough that only I could hear. "And what will you do with it, little wolf? If the truth destroys me, it destroys you too. You're mine, bound." The mark on my neck burned at his words, heat spreading through my veins like fire. It was both torment and desire pulling me closer to the very man I swore I would resist. I hated him. I wanted him. And that contradiction was slowly consuming me. The following days blurred into a dangerous dance. The pack whispered louder than ever. Some looked at me with pity, others with hunger, but most with rage. To them, I was the outsider who would bring ruin. The palace became a battlefield of gazes and whispers. Every corner held the door slammed shut and I was left in darkness, the weight of everything pressed against my chest. Kieran. The truth. The curse. I should hate him, should want nothing more than to see him broken. But the thought of him seeing me like this, chained, helpless, bleeding, filled me with a terror deeper than death itself. Not because I feared dying, but because I feared he would break when he watched me die. And I wasn't ready to let him break. Not yet. Not when, against every reason, I wanted him whole. The elder's voice echoed through the chamber as he left me to the dark. The king will watch you die like the others. And for the first time, I wondered if the curse wasn't about him at all, but about me. He claimed me to break me. Instead, I broke his curse. The stone walls of the dungeon bled with shadows, and the air was thick with iron, sweat, and despair. My wrists were raw from the chains that cut deeper with every movement, but worse than the pain was the silence. Silence meant he wasn't coming. Silence meant this was the end. The beta's words still rang in my ears. The king will watch you die like the others. I wasn't afraid of death. I was afraid of leaving this world without ever knowing what he truly was beneath the crown, beneath the cruelty, beneath the curse. The door groaned open, torchlight spilling into the room, and there he was, the Alpha King, my cursed mate. His eyes didn't hold the cold, detached power that once froze entire councils into silence. They held fire, fear, something I never thought he was capable of. "Release her," he growled, voice cracking against the stone like thunder. The beta stepped into the light, blade in hand, smirk curling his lips. So the great Alpha finally chooses, your crown or your mate. The pack had gathered above, their howls echoing down the stairwell. This wasn't just a fight, it was judgment. I wanted to scream for him to walk away, to let me burn before I became the reason he lost everything. But the bond thrummed inside me, hot and relentless, and I knew what he had already decided. "I choose her," he said. Gasps broke like waves above us. The council, the warriors, the elders, every wolf who thought his heart was carved from stone, now heard the truth. The beta's eyes flared with rage. "Then you're no king." Steel clashed. The fight was brutal, primal. The beta moved with the desperation of a wolf who had nothing left to lose, striking with the precision of someone who had hidden in the king's shadow for too long. But the Alpha King fought with something far more dangerous. Love. Every swing of his sword wasn't for power or crown or dominance. It was for me. And for the first time I understood him, not as a tyrant, not as a curse, but as a man. A broken man who had been forced to wear the mask of a monster. Blood sprayed across the stones and the beta stumbled, blade slipping from his hand. The king seized him by the throat, lifting him into the air. "You killed them, you cursed me." The beta choked, laughing even as his life drained away. "Without me, you are nothing." "No," the king said, eyes flicking to me. "Without her, I am nothing." With a final twist, he broke the beta's neck. The body fell, lifeless, to the ground. The chamber fell silent. He turned to me, bloodied, battered, crown slipping from his head. He dropped the crown onto the stones, the sound echoing like thunder. Then he crossed the room and fell to his knees in front of me, chains still binding my wrists. "I will not rule if it means losing you," he whispered. His hands trembled as they touched mine, breaking the lock with his bare strength. The chains clattered to the floor and I fell into his arms. For the first time since fate dragged me into his orbit, I let myself believe. Believe that maybe love wasn't weakness. That maybe even cursed kings could bleed for something more than power. The pack erupted above us, torn between outrage and awe. Some would follow him into ruin, others would betray him again. But none of that mattered in this moment, because he was mine, and I had survived him. The palace was chaos. The council demanded his abdication. Warriors whispered rebellion. But the king stood beside me, his omega, his supposed weakness, and declared his truth. The curse is broken, he told them, not by blood, by love. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt the weight of what was coming. We hadn't won peace. We had started a war. At night, when the palace finally fell silent, he held me as though I were the only thing tethering him to this world. His touch was softer now, less claiming, more worship. The man who once sought to own me now sought only to keep me. Do you regret it? I whispered against his chest. Never, he said. You are the only thing I will never regret. For the first time in my life, I believed him. Days later, when the blood had dried and the court had begun to mend its fractures, the knock came, sharp, urgent, impossible to ignore. A messenger was dragged before us, cloak torn from travel, face pale with terror. He bowed, breathless, before he dared speak. My king, he said. His eyes flicked to me, lingering as though the words he carried were for me more than him. Another Alpha King has risen in the east. The hall erupted in murmurs. The messenger's voice dropped, trembling. And he wants her. Every gaze turned toward me. My breath caught. My curse wasn't over. My story had just begun. The heroine thought she had broken one curse, but another Alpha King, stronger and more ruthless, has marked her as his next claim.